Hey y'all, I'm Attica Scott, former Kentucky State Representative.
They're asking me about everything, local, state, federal, all the time. How do I do this? How do I do that? Why can't I get a speed hump? What's going on with the consent decree? Hey y'all, welcome to Ask Attica. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Friday morning. Hey y'all, welcome to this edition of Ask Attica. Like me, you're probably on your lunch break watching, and we appreciate you so much. We have a special guest today who's going to help us dig into this most recent announcement from Mayor Greenberg about changing the jail policy to comply with the Trump's administration's anti-sanctuary city policy. So today we're going to have Dan Cannon with us. I've known Dan for a while, so I know that he's going to come to us with the truth. So welcome, Dan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, as always, thank you to Stay Live Streams for maintaining this platform as part of our podcast. I also posted recently a blog about the podcast, so make sure y'all check that out so you see the vision that we're bringing to these conversations. So I want to get right into it, Dan, because I want to value your time as well as the folks who are watching. So, and again, folks, this is pre-recorded. Most of the time we go live, but sometimes we do the pre-recorded one. So thank you for sticking with us with the pre-recordings as well. So I want to start just so folks who are watching can get an idea about you and your work, Dan. So can you tell us about the focus of your legal work?
I guess at this point in my career, I'm primarily a law professor, but I have for 20 years practiced, I think, broadly what you would call civil rights law. So I started doing a lot of employment discrimination cases. Now, the focus of my practice is mostly representing incarcerated people, and victims of state violence overall. And also, we do a lot of the Olympic athlete sex abuse cases at my firm. So that's what I'm doing.
Oh, you're doing a lot, and I appreciate that work. And you talked about it some, but because I have followed you and I've seen your work, can you dig a little bit more into how your work connects with, intersects with social justice?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you have, as a lawyer, you have to be cognizant of what's going. I mean, if you're going to call yourself a civil rights lawyer, you have to be cognizant of what's going on the ground, right? Because it is, and this is something that I've just learned throughout the course of my career, right? Um, there is this idea of, like, I mean, lawyering is very top down. The law is very top down. The structures that that govern our daily lives in a representative democracy are top-down structures, right? They're hierarchical. And so you are sort of in this mode, I think, as an American lawyer of thinking of yourself as like, all right, well, I'm going to lead the charge and we're going to win this case and we're going to do this, sort of thing. And I think really being a social justice oriented lawyer in the 21st century, particularly in the times that we're living in now, is recognizing that those institutions aren't really going to save us from anything, right? Like that, the courts in general, particularly the Supreme Court in the United States, are fundamentally conservative and reactionary institutions. And so then how do you orient a practice towards social justice? Well, it's by communicating with people on the ground. It's by doing this kind of thing. It's by, trying to, make the law suit the movement. We talk about movement lawyering. That's sort of shaping the law and what we can do within the law to serve the broader goals of the movement rather than just trying to win victories in court, right? So that's sort of where my head is at these days.
I appreciate that. And you just said something I want to pick up on, and then we'll take a break and come back and we'll get into the heart of this conversation. But you said the term movement lawyering, which
Oh,
in
yeah.
the work that I do with our 501(c)(4, where I work full time, of course, we're talking a lot about movement lawyering. We're also seeing a trend, and I'm curious to know if you're seeing it as well, and if you can talk about a little bit more about why that's happening and what we do to try to combat it. But we've noticed that some of our movement lawyers with this current administration are starting to move away from movement lawyering because this administration is so oppressive and retaliatory. Are you seeing that trend? And if so, what can we do about it?
I mean, in the circles that I run in, I have to say that I'm not seeing that trend, right? If anything else, if anything, I'm seeing lawyers who formerly did not recognize the I don't want to say the impotence, but the diminished effectiveness of the courts are coming around to that, right? So if you're in a situation where the Supreme Court is obviously making it up as it goes along and, doing things to serve political ends rather than, these sort of lofty ideals and aspirations that we learn about in law school, where we're supposed to be, respect the rule of law and all that good stuff. I mean, lawyers that are on the ground and doing, any kind of work, I think, but particularly federal civil rights work, can see that. You can see that, look, these institutions are not really here for us and the clients that we serve. And I do think you see more recognition. I mean, I have seen more recognition of that basic reality by folks in academia and by lawyers that I think, wouldn't have recognized it absent the sort of um, full-scale democratic collapse that we're going through right now in the United States, right? So I don't see lawyers running, but of course, you do see headlines where you know, and something I'm sure we'll talk about a lot in the next half hour. Yeah, you see these big law firms capitulating to the Trump administration upon the slightest threat of like okay, well there's an executive order against this particular law firm, so well what we'll do to get out of this is okay, what we'll do is we'll just give you 1 million hours of pro bono work, and we'll call it even, okay, just take us off your hit list. And it really is capitulating to bullies, right? And I think what you see overall in societies, I mean, if I read the Tim Snyder's book, a couple of years ago on tyranny, and it's like back during the first Trump administration. I'm reading this thing, and it says, don't obey in advance. And a lot of people read that book, and I think a lot of people are like, yeah, when this really goes down, oh, if I can curse, when this really goes down, when the ish really hits the fan in the United States, I'm not going to obey in advance, and I'm not going to capitulate, and I'm not going to do. And what you see is exactly what Dr. Snyder talks about, in all facets of society. It's like, well, this administration is going to make life very difficult for me if I don't just go ahead and give them what they're looking for, whatever crazy thing that is, today at this particular hour. And so you do see a lot of that, I think, by big firms, sort of white shoe lawyers. Um, but overall, I mean, I think the folks that are really paying attention, that were out, to practice law for the right reasons in the first place, are seeing what's going on and understanding that that we really can't depend on the courts for real change. That said, the courts are still holding the line in some really important ways that we can talk about if you want,
Yes.
at this moment. But those are mostly the lower courts, and it mostly is just like, slowing the flow of fascism to less of a gushing faucet, right? I don't know.
And I want to come back to that at the end of our conversation, right?
Yeah.
How the courts are um, one of our main lines of defense. And so we're going to take a break. We'll come back in a few minutes, and we'll be back, y'all, with Dan Cannon, and we're going to dig into this conversation about Mayor Greenberg changing the jail policy. Thanks, y'all.
Through every note, every performance, the arts connect us. The arts connect us through joy and through awe, bridging cultures and generations. From intimate theaters to the grandest stages, the arts bring us together, reminding us that we're never truly alone. When we experience the arts, we experience each other. Kentucky Performing Arts. The arts connect us.
All right, y'all, welcome back. We're having an important and timely conversation with Dan Cannon, who is a movement lawyer, I will call him. He's a civil rights lawyer, understands the times that we're in, and pays close attention to what's happening in politics here in Louisville and across Kentucky. And so I want to get into this conversation. I've been getting lots of questions from folks who want to know how in the world Mayor Greenberg could, without Metro Council approval, change the jail policy, Louisville Metro Department of Corrections, the jail policy, to comply with the Trump administration's hatred of sanctuary cities. And so I want to start, Dan, with helping to educate folks about what is a sanctuary city. So let's start there. What is a sanctuary city?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a precise definition for a sanctuary city, but in general, what you're talking about when you have sanctuary city policies is you have a city infrastructure that has said that it's not going to cooperate with federal immigration enforcement in some way, right? So one of the biggest ways that you see in some cities is, we're just not going to um, we're not going to communicate at all with ICE. Like our police department is not going to coordinate with ICE. We're not going to, like if you show up without a warrant, we're not going to cooperate on, in the turning people over from the jails. Um, the ICE has this practice of putting a detainer on people who have been arrested for something, right? So you've been arrested on some sort of state charge, and ICE has reason to believe that you're an undocumented person. They'll put a detainer, which is a request to the jail that says, keep them, even if you're inclined to release them otherwise, keep them until we come and get them, right? And sometimes that can be, a day, and sometimes that can be a week or longer, right? So, somebody's just sitting there potentially beyond the expiration of their sentence or after they've made bail or, longer than they ought to be sitting in a county jail, for example. And, ICE can come and get them if a sanctuary city, right, or if a jail has said we're not going to cooperate with, or if a city administration has said we're not going to cooperate with federal law enforcement on this, either come and get them or don't, but we're not going to hold them beyond their time. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about when we talk about a sanctuary city policy. To my way of thinking, Louisville is not a sanctuary city, and hasn't really ever been a sanctuary city. Prior to, I was looking at the news on this stuff this morning, prior to 2017, we were like Louisville was fully cooperating. I'm an Indiana kid, so I'm not taking responsibility for it.
Right.
But Louisville was fully cooperating with an ICE detainer. Like the jail was saying, yeah, okay, we'll hold them for 48 hours
Mhm.
and then turn them back. Well, in 2017, that policy changed and said, well, okay, we're just going to hold people for 5 to 12 hours.
Mhm.
And so now that I guess is probably where we're going with these questions. Yeah, like we're back to this 48-hour hold. So um,
So you talked about sanctuary policy. We know Louisville. People love to call Louisville liberal Louisville, and I often say to people, I was born and raised here for the most part, a little bit of time other places as a kid. First of all, Louisville is not as liberal as people want to claim it is. It's just a little bit more blue than most of Kentucky. That does not make Louisville liberal in any form or fashion. So we need to check ourselves with that language. The other thing you talked about is the fact that Louisville was never really a sanctuary city. So before we get into the details about Mayor Greenberg's decision, can you talk a little bit about why you would not say that Louisville was a sanctuary city and why I want you to dig a little bit deeper into that, and then why in the world would the Trump administration claim that Louisville is a sanctuary city?
yeah, well, what's interesting is that the Trump administration, even after Louisville said that. Oh, yeah, so let me back up to the first part of your question first, and that is to say that there aren't really any discernible policies that I'm aware of in Louisville that have been passed by Metro Council or that have been issued by executive edict from the mayor that would qualify as sanctuary city policies in the formal sort of way that you have them in places like Chicago, for example, right? So there's not a discernible written policy that I know of that would qualify Louisville as a sanctuary city. Prior to 2017, as I was saying, there's this 48-hour hold. Like the jail, I think, had agreed to keep people for 48 hours beyond when they were going to be released, even if ICE had a hold on them, right? Then that changed in 2017. And again, by executive fiat, this is just the mayor saying, well, we're not going to do that anymore. We're only going to hold them for 5. We're going to notify Department of Homeland Security and they can come get them if they want before they're released, but we're going to release them when they get released. So essentially, what the media is calling it a 5 to 12 hour hold.
Mhm.
Um, After that was instituted, the Trump administration the first Trump administration looked at Louisville and said, not a sanctuary city. You guys are fine. So same policy, here 8 years later. And the DOJ, Pam Bondi's DOJ looks at every city in the country and says, look, you're all sanctuary cities and you need to do something to come into compliance. I mean, I think that they've designated like Campbell County and Scott County, Kentucky, like these are sanctuary, these have sanctuary policy. Well, of course, it's nonsense. And they've looked at, liberal Louisville, socialist Louisville, and said, look, here's a sanctuary city, and if you don't, play nice with us, we're going to sue you and we're going to deprive you of all this federal funding and all this other stuff, right? So that's essentially why that is the justification for the stated justification for why we are going back to 48-hour holds. I mean, I think if you talk to people in local, what's funny about this stuff is that if you talk to people in local law enforcement, the reason
Mhm.
why there are sanctuary city policies to begin with, right, is because it's good policy. Like you want the people that live in your community, whether they're documented or undocumented, you want them to cooperate in criminal investigations. And if they think that, as soon as they come forward, like a victim of a crime comes forward and says, hey, this bad thing happened and here's where it happened over here. And they're like, okay, well, thank you very much for your statement. Now we're going to turn you over to federal law enforcement and
Right.
you're going to be, shipped back to Honduras or whatever. So,
Mhm.
it's good policy. If you talk to local law enforcement, people that have been doing it for long enough, even, police chiefs, even in small towns, will tell you, yeah, we don't want, to people to think that if they come to us, it's automatically going to have some sort of immigration consequence for them.
Mm. Yeah.
But anyway, that's where we are, and the city of Louisville has now capitulated to the Trump administration's
Yes.
demands,
Mhm.
um, and we've caved into the bully. But that's as we said, that's what a lot of people are doing. So
That is what a lot of people are doing. And because our jail has, for the past several years, been experiencing extreme overcrowding, we've been seeing deaths in the jail every year, that we've been tracking them for at least the past 5 to 6 years. We're seeing deaths in the jail every year, corrections officers bringing in drugs, etc. Why would we want to go back to where we've come from? We've done so much work to try to address that jail overcrowding, and now it sounds to me as if we're going to go right back to that place with taking away the 48-hour or 5 to 12 hour hold. So, I mean, what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, do you think that jail officials want to keep people in there, in a place that's overcrowded and is losing money? I mean, it's widely acknowledged that, it's. I mean, I hear from people all the time. Well, follow the money. It's the jails are making so much money on having these people warehoused in there, and oftentimes that is true. It is not true in the case of Louisville Metro Corrections. They are losing money. That is an institution that loses money. It does not make money for the city or for anybody else. And, you think they want to hold people in this overcrowded, understaffed horror show for any longer than they have to? I don't think so. I don't think even the most sadistic administrators want to do, you know, something like that. They want to get people in, get them booked, and get them
Mhm.
out, right? So, in addition to the trust issues that come along with cooperation with federal law enforcement, for police especially. This is just an administrative burden for cities, and
Mhm.
it's a lot of times why this is part of what drives sanctuary, like honest to God, sanctuary city policies in places that have them. It's an administrative burden, and it's not
Mhm.
good crime prevention or policing.
That's exactly right. So we've got about 10 minutes remaining. So I want to get to this question. Dan, when I tell you folks from all kind of walks of life, including immigrants and refugees and community activists and organizers who care, they're asking how is it that Mayor Greenberg could change the jail policy without Metro Council approval? You talked about it a little bit, but if you could just specifically respond to that question.
Well, because I mean, he's got a lot of executive authority under state law. I mean, it's just as simple as that, right? So a lot of the policy is for the jail and for the police departments in all cities in Kentucky are made by executive fiat. The mayor has a lot of control over that. Can the city council do something about it? Can the city council come back behind them and say, all right, now we're going to pass these sanctuary city policies? Theoretically, yes. I don't know that there's the political will to do that right at this moment, and it would be subject to the mayor's veto. I suspect he would probably veto something like that, and would have to bounce back to the city council for a 2/3 vote to override it. And I mean, I don't envy Mayor Greenberg in this position. I mean, if you read the interviews or read the news coverage on this, it's sort of like, well, if we don't do this, they're going to take away, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of funding or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And also this, we're going to have these giant immigration raids and crackdowns every day, like they're doing, in the bigger cities. And we just don't want that here. And I mean, this just seems to be the general attitude of everybody, right? Universities,
Yeah.
um, cities, everybody that's sort of capitulating, law firms, anybody that's capitulating in advance to these, like ridiculous demands by the Trump administration are like, all right, well, we're just going to we'll keep the heat off of us.
Mhm.
And, that we're just, live to fight another day. And there's something to be said for that. And I get it. And one of the news reports characterized this as a Hobson's choice. And I think that's true.
Mhm.
You've got an irrational actor that's got a gun to your head. And so what do you do with that? Um, I don't think that what Mayor Greenberg did here, and I don't think the folks who are capitulating are making the right choice for reasons that we discussed before, reasons that are laid out very eloquently by Dr. Snyder. Like you don't obey in advance when you're facing fascism,
Yes.
because where does it get you? You think we're not going to have massive immigration raids in Louisville just because we're no longer a sanctuary city, just because we're doing
Mhm.
a 48-hour hold on people that are in the jail? I don't think so. I mean, I think that, with this budget explosion for Department of Homeland Security, for ICE in particular, you're going to see massive immigration raids everywhere.
Mhm.
And certainly we see, a significant enough ICE presence in Louisville
Yeah.
now and in southern Indiana. And that's
Mhm.
only going to expand. It doesn't matter how much capitulating we do, I think, on the municipal level.
That's right. And we're going to come back and dig a little bit into that last piece around the ice raids. We're going to take a few minutes break, folks, and we'll be right back with our special guest, Dan Cannon.
Hey guys, before we get back to the live stream, I'm Tracy, the bartender at Southern Hospitality Bar and Grill, located at 3402 West Broadway. You guys got to come and check us out. You can call your order in, and the phone number is 502-822-1474. Again, I'm Tracy, the bartender at Southern Hospitality. Come check us out, guys.
All right, y'all. Thanks for coming back with us. We are here with our special guest, Dan Cannon. And, we've been talking about something that's very timely around Mayor Greenberg changing the jail policy to comply in advance with the Trump administration's threat to cut funding to Louisville if it did not change its so-called sanctuary city policy, which it did not really have. So, Mayor Greenberg, as you said, Dan claimed that the policy change was to avoid immigration raids and protect federal funding for Louisville. I have a question for you. So, have ICE raids suddenly stopped in Louisville? And you responded to this a little bit before the break. So now can we expect that there will be no more ICE raids, that when Derby comes around and where most of the trainers are
Yeah.
people who are immigrants, do we no longer have to worry about ICE presence?
I mean, I guess we'll see, but I think
Okay.
it's I think it's really magical thinking to think that. I mean, again, you're negotiating with an irrational actor. And that, any lawyer will tell you that is a really difficult thing to do. Well, we have assurances from the Trump administration that, which we don't have, by the way, but let's just say that we have assurances from the Trump administration that they're not going to do these massive crackdowns and that they're going to, give us all of our funding. I mean, how many times do we got to get burned by that hot stove, folks? I mean, we know that this is not an administration that is dealing rationally. We know that this is not an administration that is going to keep its word if it says, I mean, this is a thing that's well documented that we know, like that they're going to do whatever they want regardless. And I don't think it behooves us to capitulate in advance. But as I said, I don't really envy the mayor for having to make that call. A lot of what people are trying to do now are protecting short-term interests, and sometimes you have to do that. But protecting short-term interests, and I think that in doing so, though, a lot of these institutional actors are really sacrificing long-term interests in a big way.
Yes, absolutely. The health of our communities, the trust in our communities, our ability and willingness to look out for and support one another. And I guess we just threw compassionate city out the door. I guess we're no longer that. So haven't heard that word in years now. So my last question to you, Dan, before we go, I want to come full circle. So you talked about judges in the beginning and them basically being one of our last lines of defense. They're trying to hold the line. So let's close out this conversation because I think it's a good way for people to start thinking about what's our future advocacy. What are some concrete ways in which the courts are trying to hold the line and be a barrier against the most repressive and oppressive parts of this administration?
I mean, it depends on the court, doesn't it? And so, I mean, I think you have a stark division in the district courts. Like the Supreme Court is essentially fully captured at this point, right? And is just an arm of the Trump administration. When you look at the federal courts overall, which is mostly the sandbox that I play in, it's a mixed bag of courts that are captured and judges that are going to do whatever the Trump administration says, and judges that are willing to stand up for the rule of law and do things that make sense. So I mean, I do think that there's a lot of hope to be found in state courts. The state courts are, even as the federal system collapses, the state courts have been around for, 500 years or something like that, and are likely to continue operating and providing some measure of justice and democracy and all those wonderful things that we've come to expect from the courts. So, yeah, I mean, I think the courts are obviously performing an important function right now, but I think the best way that you could look at that in this moment is that the courts are sort of slowing down what's happening, right? The federal district courts are still mostly not captured and are slowing down what's happening. Of course, which is good. I mean, that's a good thing and every now and then there's a victory that will land and that will stick. And this authoritarian regime doesn't really know how to be an authoritarian regime. So they're not, going full bore constitutional crisis. They're just sort of, they're not saying, we don't care what the courts say, not too loudly yet, right? Notwithstanding the DOJ official that was just put on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, who is in fact saying, ignore what the courts say. But they're biding their time and they're waiting for the decisions to get up to the Supreme Court, which has been fully captured, and they know that is going to go their way. The district courts are managing to slow things down, and that's good. Whatever you can do to slow fascism is a good thing. We should be looking for lots of tactics to do that, and the courts are one. But ultimately, the thinking that I think has attended left of center politics in the United States for the last, 50 or 60 years, which is, all right, we'll see you in court. You're going to do something heinously illegal. You're going to pass some stupid law. You're going to take an executive action that you didn't have the authority to do. Well, we'll just sue you over it. And I think that the veil of that kind of thinking is starting to lift, right? Where people are starting to see that's not going to do it. And that is obviously, depressing to somebody who is a lawyer and has worked in the law and, been occupied with the rule of law for their entire career, their entire lives. But also, I think that you can find some hope in it because when you start to focus away from those top-down institutions, you really start to thinking about building power from the ground up, right? And that's that's where we have to be to survive this moment in history.
I appreciate that, Dan. And I want folks to know that there are some judicial seats that are appointed and some that are elected. So please, folks, turn over your ballots if you're in a place like Louisville or somewhere in Kentucky where most of the time those judicial races are on the back of your ballot. Turn over that ballot. Get to know the folks who are running for these judicial seats, whether at the local or state level, because your vote has power. It really does matter. It makes a difference from what you just heard from Dan, who is a judge, right, that's serving maybe on the state Supreme Court, for example, where we had an election last year. So pay attention to those elections because elections, as we see, absolutely do have consequences. So Dan, thank you so much for being a guest on Ask Attica today. I want to, as I always do, check in to see if there is anything that I may have forgotten to ask or something that you want to make sure to lift up before we go.
No, I don't think so. I mean, everything you said is spot on about paying attention to the courts, pay attention to the state courts because those could be, sort of welcome refuges from even whether federal courts are not. And don't dodge jury duty. Jury duty is important. That's where you have the most power, democratic power as a citizen. But people are always trying to get out of it. Don't do that.
Yeah, good point. Thank you so much for that reminder. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Ask Attica. As always, reach out to me if there's something that you want to ask about. I absolutely will go and try to find the folks who can respond to those questions. And as always, of course, thank you to Stay Live Streams, always willing to adjust as needed to bring you this podcast. Watch live or watch this recording on Stay Live Streams Facebook and YouTube pages. And of course, I'll share clips on the other platforms. All right, y'all, take care.
If you do nothing else.
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 If you do nothing else.